Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. Welcome to Putra Sarjana seminar series organized under School of Graduate Studies with the name of Putra Sarjana. Today for today's seminar we have two speakers, and before starting the seminar I would like to introduce one by one. Our first speaker is Professor Gina Wisker. She has worked in educational development since the early 1980s, initially in her previous role at Anglia Ruskin University, where she also coordinated women's studies and taught English. The Prof. Gina completed her PhD at Nottingham University, where she worked on a study of representations of self in contemporary English and American fiction, and followed that with 3 years at the Center for Higher Educational Studies, Institution of Education, London University, as the researcher for the inquiry into the role of external examiner. She also has received her title of Professor of Higher Education and Contemporary Literature. And our second speaker is Dr. Gillian Robinson. She is a Reader Emerita at Anglia Ruskin University, and she completed her PhD, MA and BEd Honours at London University. Her work experience and publications mainly focus on postgraduate students, learning including issues of cross-cultural supervision and threshold concepts. It is based on research derived from running an international PhD program for 12 years. Her continuing research interests are in the area of art and design education, with future publication on the value of sketchbooks as a tool for developing creativity, thinking skills, and metacognition. Our today workshop title is Good Practice in Supervising Postgraduates Module 1, Overview of Supervision. The first module of this workshop will be focusing on overview of supervision and what to expect on the beginning stage of supervising postgraduate students, considering the personal, learning, and institutional dimensions of supervision. This workshop is designed to help universities to getting to know the personal, learning, and institutional dimensions of supervision at the initial stage of working with the students, preparation on the issues that will possibly emerge during the initial stage of supervision, design ground rules and establish good working relationships between supervisor and supervisee, provide support for students to develop manageable research questions, and help to support the learning journey throughout the research process and the writing process. Now I would like to call our first speaker, Professor Gina Wisker.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here because both Jill and I were in this very room for the International Doctoral Education Research Network conference about 4 years ago. So we felt at home when we walked in the room, and it's good to see so many of you. I might move that a little bit away from me. The first thing you need to know about us is that we don't stand up and talk at podiums much, but the PowerPoints are going to be used to guide us through what will be dialogues. So we will several times say, turn to your neighbour and talk about this, and then ask you what you've got back. So you'll need to be ready to tell us what you've thought, because we believe that learning itself, but learning between supervisors and students is a dialogue. So that's how we try to have a dialogue with you. But we have got stuff we've brought you. I've also got a website where the PowerPoints will be lodged and other things are lodged, and I'll show you where that is. So later on you can go home and find it and download whatever you want. So Jill and I then are going to be working with you until about 12 o'clock. And what we want to think about is, you can all see this okay? I'm not blocking it, it's up there. About what do we mean by good practice in supervision of postgraduates? There's a lot of people here. What I'd like you to do to start with is, would you put your hand up if you are already a supervisor? Hands up. Already a supervisor of postgraduates? Okay. If you are at the moment a postgraduate student and are going to be a supervisor, will you put your hand up? So that's the rest of the room. Good. We're all thinking about the supervisory process. And today I would want you to keep in your head the idea of a very good supervisor. It could be you. It could be the supervisor you have at the moment. or it could be an ideal. So think of what a very good supervisor will be. Welcome. And we will be asking you for their characteristics during the day. Okay. So the first thing is for you to think, we're going to give you 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and we want you to talk to each other about this. What outcomes do you want from this morning? And what issues do you bring? What concerns, perhaps? What problems or what questions? So we want you to think now why you're here. So, what are the outcomes and what issues do you bring with you? And what we want to do is to start thinking about what makes good supervision. So the first 2 questions, 5 minutes. I want a lot of noise. Talk, over to you. We're doing nothing. But you have to answer me, so I need some answers. First 2 questions.
You're on your own.
Move together. That's better. Make friends. I know. Okay. Thank you all for talking and discussing that. That usually just focuses you. We're going to collect some of the things you say. So Jill, who can actually type, whereas I can't.
She hopes.
She hopes. It's just... We're just going to ask you for either an outcome or an issue. And it could be any issue like, how do we ensure that we work together well as a supervisor and a student? Any issue is fine, and any outcome is fine. So I'll just go around the room. Yes?
Teacher-centered. So many things have been done by the teacher. Teacher was the only authority in the classroom, and we just ask him or her to receive feedback, just like an encyclopedia. We are not familiar how to handle the case, how to handle the research, how to deal with the problems that may have on this terrible journey. I can't say really terrible journey to write the thesis.
Okay, we'll stop you. So it's international students, and it's also, you're talking about different learning styles and behaviours, and this afternoon, if you stay, that's what we'll be looking at for most of the afternoon, differences. So we are aware of that. We're also aware of the myth that people in Malaysia don't talk to each other if you ask them to, because you just did that. I've been here a lot, so I know that's a silly myth. But some of that is about learning to behave differently in a different culture. But most of this afternoon is about that. But you are surely a very international mix, are you not? Would you put your hand up if you're from Kuala Lumpur? Everybody from Kuala Lumpur, hands up. Okay. Everyone from somewhere else other than Kuala Lumpur, hands up. Yeah, okay.
Do you mean Kuala Lumpur or Malaysia?
Ah, yes, well, because some people are not from Malaysia. Anyone who's not from Malaysia, hands up. You see, good. No, that's nearly half the room, not from Malaysia to start with. Wherever we do work with postgraduate supervision, we find a really interesting multicultural mix. So this is a common issue. It's an interesting issue that we have to look at cultural difference as we start to engage in the supervisory and student terrible journey. I like the terrible journey. I hope it's not so bad. Okay, thank you. That's one major issue. Can we have another issue? Yeah.
Regarding to my friend's study, I want to talk about communication gap between students as international individuals and between full-time supervisor, maybe sometimes because of lack of appropriate interaction.
Yes.
And we can't understand each other maybe.
Yeah.
And then if there is no good interaction, we cannot reach our aim and the next process that we want to reach and achieve.
And some of that will be to do with language and some cultural background and some learning differences and some that it's just hard to talk with some people.
Or we can say maybe students also, I'm a student in PhD, I'm a PhD student, maybe there is a low communication skill for how I should handle for my understanding as a student.
Thank you. Other issues people thought of? Yeah, another one, go on, yeah.
I'm sorry to raise the second issue. I think, first of all, a supervisor and students should have a very good and friendly manner. If they just keep distance, I know the level of ranking, but I think they can solve a problem easier. And even before something horrible may happen, 3-4 months has been just missed, the problem will be solved.
Through good interaction.
Yeah, through the interaction. It is very valuable. People have different emotional or psychological aspects. So I think both sides, even the students should know and understand the supervisor, and the students should understand.
So it's a sensitive interaction, a mutual interaction. People have said when we've worked where they talked about mutual respect as well. We're different sorts of people. We need to understand each other's well-being, each other's lives, and have a good dialogue. Yes, thank you. It's more difficult for some people than others because some people are not so used to talking closely with one person. So if we think about the supervisor's job quite often as very difficult, for example, if they are a lone scientist who's used to working with scientific experiments, they might find it more difficult to have a one-to-one learning conversation with a student. So sometimes it isn't that they don't want to, it's that they're not sure how to. So we need as supervisors and students to learn to speak to each other. Other things? Other issues? Yep. No, I don't think that's working. So yes, it is.
I want to say, I think there's one more issue is including I have faced is supervisor as a mentor rather than just like supervising and then just have a meeting and that's all. He should contribute in guiding the students rather than just asking him, what are you doing?
Yes.
So I think this is someone supervisor as a mentor. He should contribute in making the student.
Helping them develop. So they're acting as a mentor. You're a model. As a supervisor, you're a model. You care about the students' development. You nurture their development. You think about them as a growing colleague. One of my jokes about supervisors is that they supervise students. They need to remember that in 20 years' time, that student might be employing them. You know, so you're mentoring somebody to be a colleague and maybe a future employer or a future co-researcher. We're all in a big community, a big supervisor and research community. And so mentoring is really, very important. And everybody is different. The idea of mentoring is about working with an individual's learning. Every one of my PhD students, who are all in my head at the moment, as I talk with you, everyone is a completely different kind of learner. They need a different sort of mentoring and developmental work for them to do their best. So it's constant battle to work out what to do next. Any other issues? Prof.
I'm talking from the point of view, from the supervisor's point of view, because I think the students normally expect that supervisors should manage the students well.
Yes.
But I think it should be the other way around, and it should be a two-way thing, that the students also should learn how to manage their supervisors.
Absolutely.
So this is the thing, because every time students always say that the supervisor should manage the students, but I think the other way, if you want to get the whole of the thing and to make your journey exciting, not like the one that the student said is horrible one. So you should be able to learn also the tricks of how to manage your supervisors. I think that is one of the
Yeah,
things
what
that I
to
want,
ask for and when,
Yes.
and how to let them know things are not working without feeling insulted, while still being respectful and friendly.
Maybe
Yeah.
to add to Prof. Aini, just to share, professors have different philosophies, right? Some professors, they are very motherly, some professors, they are different philosophies. But I believe that we all try our best to make the students mature. It's the different ways of how they do it. Yeah, but sometimes you get professors who just say, okay, I had my professor whom I met only during my PhD, I think 3 times. That's about it. My emails about, I think, three emails and just half a page of email. That's about it. But I think he's a good professor. But somehow, I don't get that, you see. But I think I did well. I got my PhD, you see. So it depends. But as Prof. Aini said, it's a mutual thing. We must work into getting to know our professor, and at the same time, the professor also get to know the students.
So manage them, especially, well, you obviously managed yours on very short amounts. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Individual differences, because there is individual differences between students for supervisors, and sometimes maybe we realize that there is the same behavior with different stages or different ages of students, and this can make students come down in the motivation, because for example there is differences between performance of mature students and maybe the communication is a little bit more stronger than the students that in this character are the less than others.
We're going to talk a bit about that journey, that trajectory, and the stages, because I think we are going through learning stages in a long project. If it's a PhD project, 3, 4, 5, 6, however long years it takes, sometimes you're working hard and successfully, sometimes you don't know what to do next because you're stuck, and then sometimes you're going very fast, writing well, and you're working to completion. Different stages, different moments of being stuck, different moments of celebration, and then matching the way in which you supervise as a supervisor, those kind of stages. Some of that's about predicting them a bit, but everybody's a little bit different. People get stuck at different points. But the prediction is you need a lot of attention at the beginning and a lot of attention at the end. And things in the middle can usually keep going, but when it goes wrong, the supervisor needs to be there with attention as well. So it is a journey. We'll have a look at the journey and think about the differences. Any last one before we stop and move on? No? Yes, go on.
In some cases, students expect too much from the supervisor. They expect supervisor
To do what?
To teach.
To teach them. Well, that's what you're saying. Maybe it's a different cultural model. Yeah.
Supervisor just supervise you to do the work, and to plan the best way possible. Not to teach how to write a literature review, or maybe you understand?
I think it's a sliding scale, because I feel we have research development programs that teach you how to write the literature review. But when I sit with my student who's writing one, I will also do some teaching. What I won't do is do it for them. So we have, on the one end, you do it yourself, and on the other end, I'll do it for you. And we all find our places in between. But a supervisor is not the only helpful person or the helpful system, because if you're students, you have each other. One person's good practice, you can learn that. You're not copying, you're learning good practice. There are websites, there are programs, there are development programs, and you can learn how to do it from reading, thinking, talking to others, trying it out. I think we do some teaching, but we definitely don't do it for the student, because when they finish, they won't be able to do it. If we've done it for them, they can't go out into the world and teach somebody else or show someone else or get a job doing this work. So they must learn how to do it themselves. But it's a long, difficult journey, not, I hope, so terrible. All right, we'll stop. Thank you. Let's see what we said. We asked you about outcomes and issues. You mostly spoke about issues. Thinking about differences between international students and local students. Thinking about communication gaps and how to get good communication. Stay friendly. We'll think a little bit later whether you need to be friends. Or whether that's better after you've finished, so that you can have an honest interaction. Mutual respect. Supervisors being mentors. So they're guiding and enabling. Other people have talked about them as coaches, where you look at somebody's weaknesses and you help them build up strengths. You look at their strengths and you help them build on them, rather like a sports coach. So you're a mentor, you're a coach, you're friendly but not your closest friend. You need to be managed, you need to manage. Yeah. Managing the supervisor, that's the first thing I ever wrote about supervision, was for students to manage their supervisors. Find the way to ask them questions, find the way to make suggestions, find the way to let them know what you need next, and not to intrude too much or they back off. Different support at different stages. Okay, and sometimes managing expectations is good. So sometimes the expectations of students are too high. And that is mostly about what we were talking about earlier, will somebody please do it for me? Because it's so difficult. But those expectations need to be managed so students can be independent learners and can go off and do research or research-based work in their future jobs and not feel dependent on someone else. Thank you. That's a very wise set of issues. Other things people have said from other sessions. People wanted guidelines for good supervision. They wanted to identify support systems because you're not alone as a supervisor. They want to know how to keep good students. They want to know how to, and this is something which is crucial, convert a vague idea into a concrete proposal. Students usually come in with, I think I might like to ask something about this, or I want to look at that. How do you, as a student, how do you, as a supervisor, convert that interest, which is a bit vague, into a proper research question with a proper research proposal so it can be asked and answered? We'll do a little bit of work on that. Because the programme that Jill managed actually graduated 250 or more PhD students. And so everyone began by sitting with us and saying, I'd like to look at, and you'd think, oh no, how are they going to do that? And then together we'd all work with them so that they turned that into a research question that they could actually ask, not just an interest. But it must be an interest too. Okay? Dealing with academic isolation, making sure people complete quickly enough. The big thing for me is the autonomy. Strategies for promoting autonomy. How do we enable students to work on their own? And the next big thing for me is critical thinking. How to work with students, how to work with yourself so that you're working at a critical, conceptual, creative level. So your work will be a contribution to knowledge, so you've moved things on. That's crucial. That's crucial at master's level, and it's absolutely essential at PhD level. That it must be conceptual, critical and creative enough to be a PhD and not just busy.
What is academic isolation?
Academic isolation. But doing a PhD is really very lonely. It's about being isolated. So one of the worst things for students is you're the only one who's doing that piece of work and you've got no one to talk to. Yes, we've got some nods. So I did my PhD 120 miles away from my supervisor without anybody else to talk to while I did a full-time job. So it wasn't, when I spoke to him it was brilliant, you know, but he was a long way away. It was before the internet, so we didn't email. And what really worked was when he put me in touch with somebody else in the town I was living in, because I was living in Cambridge. And this other person was very kind, and he gave me his PhD research group. And now I started talking with them. And I know I moved on a lot because they were very clever and we exchanged ideas. You can be amazingly isolated. You're the only one who's doing your project. So that's a long answer. But anybody feel isolated as a student or a supervisor? Yeah? Right. You need to find communities.
One of the strengths of the program that I ran was that we recruited it in cohorts, so small groups of students together, and they formed even smaller communities of practice within their cohort, with interest groups, maybe with similar methodologies, with similar subject focuses, and that really enabled them to be motivated to continue rather than being isolated and feeling they were the only one with the problems that they'd got.
And if you don't have that community, and it can be constructed, you need to find a couple of people to talk to. Now with the internet, they might well be in Italy, or they could be, somewhere, it could be in England. So you can find 2 or 3 people who are interested in your work, who are close by, or who are international, and share your issues with them. And that kind of community for the student can really help them get through. So to switch that for the supervisor, if you know your student is isolated, can you put them in touch, as mine did, with students somewhere else who are working in a similar area? You will have the networks to do that. And then they've got someone to talk to, and they're more likely to get through. Okay, and negative feedback, all sorts of things. Right. I think this is quite quick. Is anybody already supervising a PhD? Hands up if you're supervising PhDs. Okay, already. Who's already been supervised or being supervised? Have we all been supervised? Yeah? You might not think it's effective, but you've all been supervised. Good. So I won't ask you to tell me your whole histories, but think about the good supervision that you've had. Think about turning around any bad supervision. I had good supervision, I'm lucky, but my master's supervisor was never there, and he lost my dissertation. How about that? So I had to recreate my dissertation. Right at the end, I was rung up by administration. They went, well, he's moved, we don't know where's your... So I had to say, oh, okay, here's a draft. How about that? That's so awful. But my PhD supervisor was always there on the end of the phone. So very different. We want you to talk to each other now for about another 4 or 5 minutes. 4 minutes. What are the characteristics of a good supervisor? What do you want? And in answering that, you need to think, what do you want to achieve in supervising students' research? How can a supervisor help students to achieve their research goals? So the question is characteristics of a good supervisor, but you need to think, what are we doing here? What does the supervisor want to happen? How can you help the student achieve their research goals?
We've had some of them already.
We've had some of them, but this is the way we put it together. We want 6 characteristics, single words, of a good supervisor. We're going to give you 3 or 4 minutes, talk to each other, 6 characteristics. Noise, please. Thank you. Okay, that's it. Single words we want now. 6 characteristics of a good supervisor. Supportive. Jill's going to type. She's better than me. That's going to come out as a heading. There you go. Right, supportive. Right, other words. Yep. Empathic. Empathetic. Friendly. Understanding. Available. Knowledgeable. She's not as fast as me. So hang on. Empathetic, knowledgeable, available, understanding, friendly. You've got them all. Come on, have some more. Sorry? What did you say? Hospitable. Yes. Hospitable. Well, okay. Who knows what that means? Go on. What was yours?
When he supervised.
Unbiased. Yes. Yep. Sorry? Patience. Yes. Good. Okay. Yeah. Yep. Resourceful. Yes. Yep. Good time management. Approachable. Yes. Yeah, this is not a party, and nor is it an easy ride. You have to be sharp and critical, but nicely, so that people can listen to you and learn from what you just said, instead of you going, that's rubbish. Okay? Other things? Yeah? Yeah, good feedback, which means feedback from which you can learn. Okay, there are elements of the room that haven't got any idea of what a good supervisor is like. Yep. Optimistic. Oh, yes, that's nice. You're going to get there. Good. Encouraging, yes. And I'll help you. And challenging. Yeah. What in a good way? Challenging in a good way, yes. But sometimes you have to say, this isn't working. What are we going to do with it? If you don't have a critical edge and you don't have any challenging, but about the learning and about caring about that learner, then they're just going to think it's okay. You know the lazy supervisor that doesn't look at your work and puts a tick at the bottom and says, it seems to me to be going fine. And the student's thinking, but I have all sorts of issues here. So you have to challenge it. How is this working? What should you do next? I don't agree with that. Let's see what we can do with it. So it's always about responsive, caring, challenging feedback that pushes on the critical thinking, that enables the student to move on. Any other characteristics? Follow up. Yes, okay, so don't just leave it.
Clear mindset.
Have a clear mindset. Need to be clear. Okay, we got them?
Mainly, yes.
Clear mindset and follow up.
I'm just doing clear mindset. Just imagine if Gina's better, or I'm better than Gina, what's the other one would be?
Yeah, but I put typos in. You're not going to see that because Jill's doing it.
What was the other
Follow
one?
up.
Follow up.
Great.
Okay, I think they're all
That's
right.
it. Thank you. So that's what you said. Supportive, empathic, friendly, understanding, unbiased, patient. Yeah, we've got a saint here, but luckily we're all very sainty. Resourceful, good time management, but sharp and critical, but nicely, giving good feedback. The person who got us here, apart from Noraini and Narita, the professors here, is somebody called Vijay Malan, who used to work here. And Vijay's specialist research area is feedback. So I would suggest you look at Vijay Malan and Elika Strack, who was his supervisor's work on good feedback. This feedback sandwich of say something positive, then tell them what they really need to do, and then say something positive. So their research, Vijay Malan's research on feedback, I recommend it. But feedback is often the way in which we teach as supervisors, or enable or supervise, because it's a dialogue between the student and the supervisor and the work. Okay? So optimistic, challenging, clear mindset, and following things up. If you're something that's been a problem, or even something that's been a big success, how do you follow up, help that develop, help that clear up? Great. Other things people said, you've got these in front of you. Enthusiastic about the research. That's always helpful. Not another student. Half an hour. Guiding, being well organised, keeping deadlines. Accessible, treating the role as a priority role. One of you said resourceful. It's very important that the supervisor knows where you can get something from, or where you can go and find some reading you need, or where to access a conference you need to go to, or who else you might talk to about something. So that community building, the supervisor is the link to that. You won't have, as a supervisor, you don't have all the answers, but you can always ask another supervisor, or you can ask another student. But we need to be resourceful, we need resources. Know the field, be approachable, be part of the community, remain a colleague and adapt as the student changes and develops. and be secure and unthreatened as the student develops. This list came from colleagues I work with in Gothenburg in Sweden. I think that's very sensitive. I left it, I got hundreds of lists, because of these last two. That sense that you're growing a colleague, and as a supervisor, you might well have a student who is so much more intelligent than you and is going to make really, really good impact on academic work and on the whole research area. And don't be threatened. Be just pleased to be working with them and enabling them. But some people are threatened. Sometimes that comes out with issues of publication, but we'll talk about that later. All right, so it's another list. I think of supervision as operating in these three areas that we had on our introduction. It's a personal interaction. You've got two people working together, and then maybe a community. It's a learning interaction. The supervisor learns a lot, and the student learns a lot. And the student will go through learning leaps. They'll have some blocks. They'll find out how to do research, how to write at this level. I don't think it's insulting to recognise that as you come in to do a PhD, you have a lot to learn, because it's a new stage. If you've also changed cultures and you're asking a new question, you've got a lot to learn there as well. And as supervisors, I learn from my students all the time, because they're such different learners to me and they're all working on different things. So I must be very sharp each time to be aware of how to help them as learners and how to learn from them. So it's a learning interaction. And it's also institutionally based. So there are rules and regulations that you both need to know about. And there are institutional moments where the work has to be this good, other people look at it, then it's accepted, and then a little later there is more and it goes through transfer or whatever you call it, maybe 18 months, 2 years in, and then finally the institutional processes give you examiners, and the examiners make comments and they do or don't pass it. And that's an institutional process too. So it's three dimensions. It's personal, well-being, self-development, changing, being in the world. It's a learning, and it's an institutional. If we keep these three dimensions in mind as we think about supervision and being supervised, then we've got much of the picture. Some research that we were both involved in a few years ago that we got quite a lot of money for, but it all went on researchers and not on us, never mind, looked at the research learning journey. We didn't think of it as terrible, but obviously some people had some bad moments. I just want you to think about how these different aspects of the research learning journey were linked. The research that we did involved a survey of 350 PhD students in the UK. None of them were scientists. They were in social sciences and humanities. And built on the survey, we then looked at the learning journeys over 3 years of 30 PhD students. So they kept journals about, this is dreadful, oh, look what I've found, now I really feel challenged, all the things they might report on. And we looked at those learning journals, and we interviewed them, and we interviewed 20 supervisors, and we interviewed 11 external examiners. So this lasted from 2007 to 2010, and it was funded by the Higher Education Academy in the UK. So the report is on the Higher Education Academy website, and it's called Doctoral Learning Journeys. And this image comes from the middle of the report. So one of our most interesting findings, I think, there's lots of things, and we'll talk about them today and tomorrow, was how these elements are interlinked. So that the intellectual or cognitive learning element is where the student is creating new knowledge, they're asking new questions, they're putting methodology into practice, they're situating their new work in the literature that exists already and adding to that, from when they have their findings, they're adding to that literature. That whole intellectual, cognitive, leaping journey that you go on is linked to ontology, your sense of being in the world, who you are, your identity, how you see the world. So think, is this true? Now, how has your learning been linked to your sense of self and identity? And that's linked to a personal and emotional element. So some of the research that we got from this project, I did a parallel project with international supervisors and students, and some of that was from people who are here, and some from Trinidad, and some from Australia and New Zealand, and some from Ireland, and some from Sweden. So I've got some international data, so the same thing is true all over, but differently inflected. The personal emotional issues, one of my Australian colleagues said, for some of her students who come from another country, when they go back home halfway through because the family has problems, they can't work anymore. Emotionally, they're so overwhelmed by domestic things and personal things, they can't ever get back in the learning space. And I see some people nodding. That's extreme, but for all PhD students, there will be some moments where personal issues, family issues, identity, money, health, older parents, whatever it is, stop you from working at your best. In fact, sometimes you can't work at all. And supervisors need to know then how to maybe say, take a break, we'll stay in touch, come back next September. We really understand this has happened before, you're not unusual, but you need to stop for a bit, or intermit, or whatever the answer is. Or maybe the only thing that keeps the student going is doing the intellectual work. So they have the family crisis, the health crisis, but they must keep doing the intellectual work, because that gives them a sense of importance and being in the world. There's many different solutions, but personal and emotional issues are tied up with this journey. Not least because it lasts for so long. Also, professional things were tied up with it. Maybe you are doing a PhD because your boss says you should do it, or to get on in your profession, or to go home with the qualification which will enable you to get a better job. One of my PhD students came from Sierra Leone. It took her, I'll give you as a case here, several things here. It took her 10 years to do her PhD. 10 years. Okay, she wanted to make an impact in her university in Sierra Leone. And she has done. She's gone back as a lecturer and she's making changes. So it was attached to her professional work. During the time, let's go personal and emotional, during the 10 years, she got married, she had 3 children, and she lived in 3 different countries. So she'd ring me up and I'd say, where are you now? And she'd say, oh, I'm in Iran, and, okay, fine, how's the work going? Well, sometimes she was stuck, and sometimes she was working hard. So eventually she got it, very good, but constantly the professional, the personal, all mixed up with that learning journey for her. So we had to be very aware of all those difficulties. And then finally, that whole area of meeting the course requirements, not getting stuck, being able to transit, being able to do the corrections after the examiner has made comments. I have a colleague who is Danish, who is a very, very talented PhD student. And she's just been given a lot of work to do before she can get her PhD. And she's very upset about this. And Margaret Kiley, who was here a few weeks ago, and I are now talking to her on the email going, it's normal. Let's help you think what you might do next. And it is normal to get a lot of modifications on your PhD before it's accepted. She's very clever. She'll be able to do it. She was just upset at the institutional moment where someone said it's not ready yet. So we've looked at it. She's looking at it now. We aren't doing much, but she knows we're behind her. And we just said it's normal. And I think that's important. You have corrections to do, changes to make, all the way through the PhD. It's not an easy ride, but it's worth it. And it's very like the changes you make when you send in a journal article. This is perfect. And they come back with all these things you've got to do to it before they'll accept it. So this is academic life. It's peer-reviewed. You'll always have more work to do to make it better. But at some point, someone says, that'll do. You know, it could be better, but that'll do. and then you've got your PhD, or you've got your journal article published. And more about publishing tomorrow. So meeting the course requirements, meeting the instrumental requirements, important. Does that look like your experience? Is it that mixed? Yeah, very much. Any thoughts? Anyone want to say? Yep.
This is wondering, you know, I have a few friends.
Do you want to switch it on? Then they can, yeah.
I have a few friends, and just to ask, what is your opinion as a very, very experienced supervisor who had broken marriages because of taking the PhD?
Yeah.
What is your advice on students, you know? Or what is your opinion?
There won't be a single answer to this, of course.
A few of them, they are very good students, they are doing very well. I do not know. What is your opinion? If you had a student like that, what would you advise?
All right. I don't have a single answer. I don't think Jill does. It's a transformational moment doing a PhD. It's also a lot of hard work. Sometimes relationships can't take that amount of change. So people need to be ready. If you are married, you need to be both ready for this to happen. And there will always be tensions. But if you're both ready and you can be supportive of each other, then maybe it'll survive. But maybe the marriage was never going to survive anyway, and this was just one thing, the one thing that did it. You know, so I don't know. But it is about change, and some marriages can't take any kind of change. They might have different change. They might have a job moving to a different place, or they might have a child who is very ill. Lots of things cause change, and many marriages don't survive change. I won't go into the gender reading, but later we could do that. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I had a first degree student that happened with, and it is about the transformation, as Gina said. And once you've had that transformation, it's very difficult to retract. You can't actually go back. It's about threshold crossing, which Gina and I talk about a lot. And once you've actually gone through that threshold, you actually can't go back again. You are transformed. And if in the relationship that changes the dynamic, that's sometimes very difficult to manage. But as Gina says, it doesn't just happen with PhD, it happens with other things in life. But it's a very sad thing when it's supposed to be a positive transformation for the person doing the PhD, and it ends up in this sad dislocation in a relationship.
When you're doing any long period of study, just a piece of advice, it's important to make sure the rest of the family give you the time to do it, but also that you still have family time. When I taught for the Open University in the UK, one of their first pieces of advice was not to give up all the things you like doing that are important to you because you're doing a big piece of intellectual work. Don't give them all up, because the big piece of intellectual work will then be the problem. I haven't got family time because of the PhD. I'm not going on holiday because of the PhD. I'm not going to decorate the house because of the PhD. I hate my PhD. It stops me from doing everything. So it's about managing the time and managing the change. And that's simple, but I think it's not simple. It's different. It's difficult.
There's no ideal time to do a PhD. I did mine with 4 children and a full-time job teaching in a school. And I can remember sitting at the top of the stairs with my fingers in my ears while my oldest son played drums, my other son was actually playing the violin, and the other 2 were asking me questions and needing help with the homework. But it's possible. It's just difficult.
All right. Yes, it's a journey. Okay. So, there are 3 stages, really, to a PhD. We've said something about this. Just see if you think this looks true. The beginning, you're thinking of research questions. You're thinking of the conceptual framework. That's the framework of the ideas and the theories that you're going to be using to underpin and to ask your question. Theories of, I don't know, transformation, since we've got that. Theories of relationships. Concepts about change. So you're dealing with a conceptual framework, thinking what one is. That already is a very difficult term. Most people won't understand what you're talking about, but you need to know for your thesis. The theoretical perspective, you're thinking what methodology and methods you're going to be using. You're putting together a proposal and you're starting to keep some kind of a log, some sort of journal, some sort of note of the work you're doing and the difficulties you go through, the way you overcome them, and the decisions you're making. And we always advise our students to keep a learning journal because it helps you to offload. But 6 years down the line, when you hand your thesis in and the external examiner says, why did you do it that way? You can remember because you took a note of the moment when you decided to use these methods, that methodology, and not these methods and that methodology. So the log helps you offload, work through issues and make choices. So start that at the beginning. And establishing good working relations. So the beginning is about getting the conceptual work launched, getting the good practice launched, getting the relationships launched. In the middle, we assume that the student's keeping going. They're collecting their data, they're starting to analyse it, but it's also sometimes when they're revisiting their work, they're writing more, and they're starting to work at higher conceptual levels. They're thinking and writing more cleverly. They make some leaps. Things go right, things go wrong. They start to work at a better level. Sometimes early written work is quite descriptive. In the middle, as you go over your data and you go over your literature review and you think and think and think more deeply, you start to work at a higher level. So if you're a supervisor and your student's first work comes in and it's just descriptive, do not give up. As they start to engage with the data and more reading, and as you prompt them, they will work at a higher level. So in the middle, the supervisor doesn't have to do a lot unless things go wrong, but they do need to help the student keep their motivation, because all the hard work takes place in the middle. Data gathering and analysis, all these learning leaps. And then at the end, I put writing up into inverted commas because the students need to be writing right from the beginning. It won't be finished writing, but as they write, they think through their ideas and they express themselves and they engage with the literature. So they need to write from the start and just improve it. So writing up, and at the end you're thinking, what does a good thesis look like? And how do we get through a viva? Do you have vivas in Malaysia? Yeah, okay. So the students will have to defend their PhD with 1 or 2 examiners. They're getting ready for that. Yeah, sound like the 3 stages? You can get stuck at any stage. You can make breakthroughs at any stage. So right at the beginning then, what are we after? These are some of the tensions for me. Establishing good research methods and habits. Ensuring that students develop autonomy. And working out the tension between guidance and students being independent or autonomous learners. How much guidance? How much independence? And then another big thing, which is an Australasian issue, started in Australia to begin with, is trying to get the PhD done fast enough. Completion rate. Do you have to do your PhDs in 3 or 4 years? Yes. Most of us expect to do that now. With a part-time one, you can do that twice as long, of course. But over in Australia, they won't get repeat funding unless their students complete within 3 or 4 years. It's a problem. But for some students, it takes longer to think conceptually enough and to really know what you found. So as a supervisor, you're pushing, and that's a bit of an issue. It is for me, because it took me 6.5 years to get my PhD, part-time, working, etc., and at a distance. How long did it take you?
4.
4, you see. 4 years, 4 kids, full-time job. There you go. We're all different. Okay. What's essential? Developing research skills, strategies, processes, behaviours and mindsets, problematizing and asking questions. I think for students moving from Masters to PhD, sometimes the most difficult thing is knowing that this has not been done before. this piece of work. You have to ask the questions. You've got to problematize, question what seems to be established thinking and established concepts or ideas. You've got to open up all those words and ideas you're going to use and ask questions of them. And that's quite a difficult leap at the beginning. Project design and planning, because it is a project to research 3, 4, 5 years PhD. Planning the stages, carrying it out, analysing data, producing interpretations and findings, writing the whole thing up with an argument and the theorising running all the way through it. I'm making that sound easy, but that's really difficult, because quite often PhDs, as they come together, are chunks of stuff. Bit of argument, bit of literature, bit of data analysis, and the writing through is about making something that you would want to sit in a quiet, pleasant place and read. Something that's readable, where the argument is clear all the way through, the stories are clear all the way through.
Yeah, my supervisor used to say, I want your thesis to be something I could read as a bedtime story. So in other words, easily understandable. Don't use unnecessary words or unnecessarily long words. And that kind of rang in my mind. And it's about coherence. It's about one thing leading to the next logically as you write. So it's this has happened because of what I explained before. So there's always a thus or a therefore or as well as nevertheless. So you're having to explain why some things perhaps are not necessarily simple and straightforward. So the critique, the problematizing has to come in there as well. But at the end of the day, as you explain the problems, it should still have a coherence from beginning to end, a bit like a bedtime story, and hopefully with a happy ending.
And that's a tip about not being overwhelmed with how important a PhD is, so that every single word does not have to be 6 syllables, right?
It's better that it's not.
It's better that it's not, because someone's reading it. So it's important to have all the necessary technical words in, all the complex ideas and language of your subject area, but to link them together with readable words that carry the argument. We call that the sentences and paragraphs that have got too many long words in. We call them foggy. There is something online called the fog index. If you go online and look up fog index, put some of your writing through it, it'll tell you how foggy it is. And that means it's unreadable because there's too many long words. So you explain something and then you use the long words. Don't make every word long just because you're writing a PhD, because it still needs to be read. The same for journal articles. 2 years ago I externally examined a PhD, an Australian one. And I couldn't let it through without a lot of work because I couldn't read the first 2 chapters. The student had tried to be so elevated, high up in her language, that I couldn't do it. Chapters 3, 4 and 5, fine. 1 and 2, impenetrable. And I said, she just needs to make it readable and accessible. I've never had that problem before. But I just kept reading it and I thought, I still don't know what you're saying. It's too complicated. And I think she was overwhelmed with the importance of writing a PhD. So it needed to be rewritten so we could read it, especially if it was going to be a book, and they often become books. So writing accessibly without losing that conceptual, critical, intellectual element. Getting that ready. Making it coherent and then reflecting on what exactly was achieved. These are things students learn to do while doing a PhD. When they've got it, they can tell an employer that they have these skills. They've got ideas, research skills, finding things out. They've got questioning, conceptual skills. They've got writing skills. They've got analytical skills. And they finish things off. So those skills, when if somebody ever says, why are you doing that? You say, I've got all these wonderful... In Australia and Sydney, they call them postgraduate attributes. They're not just graduate attributes, they're postgraduate attributes. Ideas, analysis, critical thinking, very good writing, finishing. Okay, I want you to think about how you get going right at the beginning and make it work. How do we establish ground rules between the supervisor and the student? Do you want some kind of a learning contract? Do you want to set out some rules together to make it work? And what do you think the good ground rules should be? And I'm just going to tell you a story about me and one of my first students. And I want you to think, how could you set up good working behaviours, thinking about me and Les. So Les is older than me, and he did a course with me a few years ago. And it was an Open University introduction course. So the first course he'd done for years. So he knew what I was like. Then he did his undergraduate, then he did his master's somewhere else. And then he comes back into my office and he says, hello, how are you? I'd like to do a PhD with you. Wow, you know, he's very clever. I'm flattered. And so we start to talk about what he's going to do and also how we're going to work together. So this is the learning story. So he says, would it be okay if I send you a draft chapter at a time? Yeah, good. And let you know 3 or 4 weeks in advance? Yes, sounds good. And as we get a bit closer to the date that we've fixed to talk about it, shall I send some questions? Some things we can talk about? Yeah, I think that's great, yeah. Would you like to send me some of your questions? Yes, okay, I'm fine with that. Good. And when we have our hour together, would you mind switching the phone off and letting other people know that they can't come and talk to you at that point? All right, that's fine, Les. Yes, that's good. Okay. And when we're having this conversation, says Les, shall I take some notes about what I agree to do and you agree to do? Yeah, that sounds good to me. And shall I write them up and send you them afterwards? Thank you, Les. Sounds cool. What's he doing? He's supervising me. Yeah, he's managing me. And he knew that if he didn't say, let's have a fixed time, let's make it quality time, let's prepare, send things in advance, send questions in advance, let's write up afterwards what we both learned and what we agreed to do. In fact, if it wasn't properly planned, that he wouldn't get the best out of it. And so he was advising me how to supervise him. Yeah. Is that a good story?
So what was your reaction?
I found it amusing, but very helpful, because he was only my second student, you see. And there wasn't much guidance about supervision around. So I use this story. I tell him I use this story. He's still amused. He's finished the PhD. The external examiner thought it was very good. He published it as a book, and he's also published a novel. And I'm just about to write a little note on Amazon about his novel. So he's great, and he helped run a community of PhD students for years and years, and they all still meet, and they co-write. So he's a highly successful PhD student, but he did know that he needed to teach me those management things. So I didn't mind, because we worked well together that way. So my question to you, a couple of minutes, we'll go on till about 11 with this. How do you set up good working relationships, agendas, those sorts of rules? And maybe how was that done with you? But let's do it well. Okay, how do you set up agendas, good ground rules? What are the issues for you? 3 or 4 minutes, a lot more noise. Your go. Thank you. Okay. No. Thoughts about good working relations? Quickly, yeah.
I just, you mentioned it's very, very important now that students must teach must learn how to teach sometimes, how to teach supervisors,
Yes.
to manage the students. And some students who know that how to manage supervisors, they have a good journey. But sometimes the students that they don't know how to manage the supervisors, some supervisors don't know how to manage the students. So they will get the difficulty.
Yes.
I mean, that's true. So what happens is you go away from this thinking, I must ask these as questions. If you're a student, so you would say at the beginning, or even now to the supervisor, how are we going to meet regularly? Where will we do that? How would you like me to send work? Can we meet after I've sent work to look at the comments? So you ask questions to help structure it. Some supervisors will naturally set up a system, and others are thinking probably about, your work and about intellectual things, and they're maybe not very systematic people. So you need to ask the questions, like Les asked me. It helped me be more structured. So yeah, everyone's different. So if you keep in your head, we need to find out ways we can work together effectively that causes this interaction that happens at a staged process, so the student never gets stuck, worried, alone. Then you need to set these things up. So it might not come naturally. The student can ask the questions. Very few make the suggestions. Mostly they ask it as questions that prompt. And many supervisors will say, what will work for you? Yes?
Since even I remember that when I was looking for supervisors, and when I went to her, I informed I'm looking for an athletic supervisor because me as an international student, I don't have any social support. And this is very important for us because we miss a lot of different aspects of life, because we live just with one aspect of life, that's the studying.
Yes.
And my friend said about high expectation of a student. I think this is related to the social support, because if I don't have any social support, of course maybe psychologically my expectation is high.
Because that's the only person you're relating to. Yes. I think many of us are aware of that. That's true mostly about students who are not in their home country or their home community. And so the supervisor who is not comfortable with being that community support should be able to put the student in touch with other people, other communities, other social student support networks. Then they don't have to do it. So we don't all have to be good at that. But you need to say, why don't you?
Yes.
I also choose the social support variables for my
Yes.
study.
So you've done all those things. Okay. And you had one, yeah?
I do believe that it shouldn't be just through verbal discussion.
Yeah.
It is a relationship, a real contract between the supervisor and the student. The supervisor already knows some points and criteria that should be taken into consideration. I, as a new student in another context, may not be familiar with those. So this is the do's and don'ts that the students who I'm going to supervise should be followed. Agree or don't agree. This is at the beginning of the journey. And do you have any more suggestions to deliver it, or maybe according to your condition, maybe it should be improved a bit? Also, a box for giving some more comments. So this is a signature.
Yeah, and in here, I haven't waved this much. I've got a huge book called The Good Supervisor. It's now available as an e-book, so if you want it, you don't have to pay as much because you can get it as an e-book. In the 4th chapter, we talk about agendas and contracts, and there's an example of a learning contract. There's also an example of something that you can use to discuss responsibilities. Now, I'm not waving this so you buy it. I'm waving it because I think sometimes a piece of paper that has a contract on it or has a series of expectations on it might act as the objective thing that you can talk through. Instead of somebody just saying this must happen, you might sit with a sheet of paper or a set of questions and then come up with an agreement. So it can be done through an objective exercise. And it can be done through a learning contract. I agree this, you agree that. And if we had longer, I'd get you to look at one and think, does this work for me? Or would I be worried about agreeing to something legally that I might not be able to do? So certainly get an agreement, write it down. If an objective piece of paper or an exercise that you do between you can help you do that, then use one. I'm going to move on to something like that. There's an activity that came out of Australia, of Ingrid Moses, that was built on by Linda Conrad from Griffith, that I've built on. And it's about talking about areas of responsibility. And it's a sort of continuum. You can sit with a sheet like this in front of you. Let me explain how it works. On the left's the student, on the right's the supervisor. And the discussion is, whose responsibility is it to... And then you've got a series of things. Put in anything you fancy. But certainly the first one is, whose responsibility is it to develop the research question? And you sit and talk about it. That's one. We've got finding conferences, editing the text for submission. That's a really important one. Finding resources, writing a paper for publication. You can put loads of things in there, but the question is, we have a discussion as student and supervisor about whose responsibility is it. So whose responsibility is it to develop the research question? Student. Hands up for student. Okay. Hands up for supervisor. And hands up for both. Right, see, this is the trick question. The trick question. The other answer to this is it does depend a bit on your subject area. So if you are an internationally renowned scientist who's just brought in £3 million and you have a funded project and you advertise for a PhD student, you need them to do that piece of work. They don't want to do something else.
Sorry.
Yes.
Please, will you properly define what you mean by developing the research question?
Okay, so...
Yes, there's a difference between initiating and developing.
Yes.
So it might be the student's responsibility to initiate a research question.
But together you develop it.
Maybe together you develop it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. So that's why it's a joint piece of work. So students quite often come in with a fascination, and together you turn it into a research question. If you're working on a large funded piece of research, you need this to be done, but you still need the student to have a piece of this project which they feel they're owning. So they've still kind of helped construct their bit of the research question. Right, so that's one of the moments that you need to discuss. I think having a sheet like this helps. And then, of course, the next one, editing the text for submission. Who does that? Student or supervisor?
Or editor.
Or someone else? Hands up for student. Who does all the final editing to make sure it's ready for supervision, for submission? Supervisor. Hands up student. Hands up supervisor. Hands up bit of both. You know that's the answer now. Okay, good. It's if the supervisor takes it away and rewrites it, you don't know if the student can write.
Or defend it in the
Or defend it. What's this? What am I defending? If they help the student write it as well as they can, it can even go to somebody else for proofreading, but not for completely rewriting. So it can be proofread anywhere, all the commas and full stops and even some elements of the dates with the referencing. That's fine. Someone else can do that. The student should probably do that, but don't feel you're cheating if you get someone else to do that. But if the supervisor does all that neatening of the writing, then the student might not be able to write like that. Could get them through, but you're also disempowering them. They need to be able to write as well as possible and as accessibly and as acceptably as possible so they can publish afterwards. But finishing off, okay. So you have to say, what do you mean about editing? Do you mean editing or proofreading, or do you mean writing it? And you have a discussion about that. because there'll be different interpretations. So early on, as you set your agendas, come up with your ground rules, you also agree areas of responsibility. And that causes a developmental discussion, which carries on all the way through. We need to do the case studies as well, don't we? I'm going to skip through this bit, and I want to get you to this bit. So you've got loads of bits on this paper. Just to think about where you might be on the learning journey and how the supervisor is supporting or not supporting. Now, diagrams are always tricky things, so I'll talk this one through a bit. It's not mine, it's by someone called Ger. This is about the supervisor's style. Whether they're a hands-on supervisor who keeps looking at everything, won't let you do anything, advises, informs, or whether they're a hands-off supervisor who lets you get on with it. This is the student's status, in other words, beginning or towards the end of their research. They're dependent sometimes, and sometimes they're competently autonomous. At the end, they're meant to be competently autonomous, and that means they can do it independently on their own and well enough. Yeah, I'm not moving it on from here, it's fine. Thank you. I'll use that in a sec. Thanks a lot. Right then. Okay, the argument is that every student's the same. This is not true, of course, but this is Ger's argument. And he suggests that at the beginning, the supervisor is very hands-on. What you're going to do, how you're going to do it, let's meet regularly, let's look at your writing. And the student is very dependent. And that's an appropriate piece of support. And as the student develops their work, now I can see if this is a pointer, that probably, then they become more autonomous. So by the time they leave you with this written thesis and the examination passed, they're autonomous. They can do it again. They're on their own. Right? Ideal journey. I want you to think whether that's like any journey you've had, because it wasn't like mine. Now, there's some problems here. If you have a very hands-on supervisor who won't let you make decisions and looks at everything you want to do at every single step, but you're already somebody who's pretty professional and competent at research and writing, you might feel some conflict. So if the supervisor is too focused on every bit of the student's work, but they can already do it, there might be some conflict. That's one possibility. Far more popular, though, is this one, where the supervisor is hands-off and the student feels that they're being neglected. Yeah? And it's well-meaning, it's benign. So very, very popular then is the supervisor saying, they've got to be independent learners, I'm going to let them get on with it. And the student's saying, I don't know where to find this, I don't know what to do, I don't know if my work's okay, I'm not sure what that means, and they just sent it back to me. And the supervisor says, they've got to be independent, so I'm not going to tell them anything. Now that we call benign neglect. They think they're doing you some good by not being in touch, but actually you're stuck because you don't know what to do next. Right? So ideally, hands-on at the beginning, hands-off at the end. This can go wrong if the supervisor doesn't really stay in touch with the student and explain things. And it can go wrong if they're too picky and the student can do it themselves.
Can I share a point of view?
Please, yes.
Yeah, at this point, some students can be dependent, very, very dependent. And if you get supervisors who are hands-off, they'll be problematic.
That's right.
But I do find students tend to depend for resources, for things, just on their supervisor.
Yeah.
They do not go out, go to their friends, get elsewhere. The supervisor is the only place that they come to get help. I think it's very problematic.
Yes. And so this is to cause discussion. That's why I put it up. Because quite often students feel the only person they can talk to is the supervisor. And we talked about international students having this issue, but all students have it. They need to talk to the communities, other students, any other student, even on email. They need to go outside and maybe get someone else to look at what they've written to see if it makes sense, or try their ideas out with other people. There are other support systems in the university, not just the supervisor. So the supervisor now is being a little bit more hands-off in my description. If a student checks absolutely everything they do, every step with the supervisor, they'll never learn how to do it on their own and make their own decisions. So they do need to develop, you do need to develop that independence. But as a supervisor, you have to be alert for when the student is not progressing and when you can step in. And that doesn't mean telling them everything and doing everything for them. As you can see, there are no 6 rules here. There might be 6 characteristics of a good supervisor, but there aren't 6 rules for getting it right, because every interaction, every relationship, every project's a bit different. Does that help? Can you see where some of the problems might be? And where sometimes you need to come back in again and focus more, and sometimes step back and let them get on with it, even so they can make a mistake, and now you can discuss how that won't happen again. Okay, so that's a diagram you can use. I think you have the handout if you want to look at that again. Oh, now we've got... It's all right, I can only do one thing. It's that one. Right, not going to do that, not going to do that. Okay. One of the really helpful diagrams that I've produced is if we think now about the research question and how you come up with it together. And I don't know whether this will work for you, but what happened was I was working with our large cohort, and I started talking about how students come in with really big ideas that they want to use as the basis for their PhD. So just think back to the beginning. PhD is huge. It's at least 80,000 words, isn't it? You're going to take at least 3 years. You can actually ask everything and do everything because it's so big. Yeah? Did you think that when you came in with the idea? Because it's such a huge thing. And actually you've got to do such a lot of reading, and you've got to ask so many questions, that, and you have to know this massive field. It's quite overwhelming. I'll tell you a short story. I've got an undergraduate dissertation student, and I work in lots of things, but this student wanted to do some work on African American women's writing, because I'd done some of that with her. So she sends me an email. Her piece of work is 6,000 words, right? 6,000 words. She sends me an email. I say, what do you want to do? And she said, I want to do African American women's writing. Lovely. What a good idea. Who do you want to look at? And what questions do you want to ask? And she says, I think I want to look at everything that Alice Walker's done, and everything that Toni Morrison's done. And I think I might add in some people who write poems as well. And I want to look at some of the slave narratives in the early 19th century. And I want to come right up to date with some rap music lyrics. And I quite like to add in some drama. Have you got a problem? What's your problem? Yeah, too huge and not focused. So I go, oh, great. How nice. I'm glad you're doing all this reading. What about, I said, perhaps you might need to narrow it, a bit, 6,000 words. What particularly do you want to look at about some of these people's work? So now we're getting a bit narrower. I'm very pleased she wants to do all that reading, but what she's got to develop is her own slice, which is her focused area on a focused amount of knowledge, so she can ask the focused question. So I came up with the analogy of a whole cake. That's everything you could ask about this field. And then your slice of that cake. So this bit. And I always found I always had to kind of draw it with them. These are all the things you can do, but which bit are you going to do? And what specific focus are you going to take? And then we could move on from there. And if they didn't want to let go of all this, I'd say you probably need to do the reading. And later on, in fact, you could look at another slice or another slice. But right now, what's your slice? Can you defend your slice? What are the boundaries to this? What are you not looking at? And how are you not looking at it? And can you defend that? Does that work for you? Yeah, okay. When you're thinking about your own project or your student's project, if that's helpful, it's often quite helpful at the end as well, for them to get ready for the exam to think, exactly what have I looked at and can talk about? I might not have solved the problem, but what is my slice? What is my contribution to a bigger area of knowledge? And to get that very clear, because that's what they're going to defend at the beginning of the thesis, in the abstract, at the end of the thesis, in the conclusion, and that's what they're going to defend in the viva. Their slice, the bit that they have contributed to knowledge in the whole field. Okay, well, we need to think about what time we have to stop, because we started a bit late. Do we want to go on a bit beyond past, or what do we want to do? 11:45. Are you okay with 11:45? Because we want to give you some case studies for about 10 minutes at the end, but just keep going a little bit. Okay, so far we've thought about establishing good relations. We thought about getting the research question right. We've thought about the roles that supervisors do come up and how we also kind of balance responsibilities. We've thought about the learning journey. We thought about the personal and emotional interactions with the intellectual work. There's lots of other things we could do. We don't have loads of time to do it in. I won't do that. But I thought what I would do is this with you. My other diagram. And this is about the relationship between research as a learning journey and the actual production of a thesis. And again, I started drawing it in the air, so I ended up with a diagram. This on the left is the research journey. My question to you, and you have a couple of minutes to talk about this, then we'll give you the case studies, is how do you get from the research journey to the written thesis? Because this is what you're supervising. This is what you're undertaking, a research journey, but nobody knows about that. All they ever see is the thesis. You know, all sorts of things happen in here, but what lasts beyond it is the thesis. So you've got to get that out at the end. Okay? So let's talk about the journey for a minute. The research journey starts with a question. You've got the proposal accepted, you know exactly what you're doing, and off you go. And after that, it becomes a lot more complicated. You read things, you find things, you don't find things. It gets quite troublesome. You start to be cleverer than you thought and more stuck than you thought you'd be, and you need support with this. You need to read yourself out of it. You need to talk to people. You've got lots of wonderful findings. My goodness. You've got more questions than answers. And at some point you've got to stop and try and put it into some sort of shape. Once you've found something that's important enough, that you understand enough and can defend enough for it to be a thesis, to be a PhD, to be a piece of research that's worth sharing. But this journey is really messy. So you might start thinking, I know what I'm doing, but actually it's not clear cut, is it? And you need to be writing right from the beginning. So writing the beginning, the first versions of these bits. This is the thesis. The thesis is like a well-built building. It's ordered, coherent and organised and linked. So this is a well-built building. And this is what we take off the shelf in the library to have a look at somebody else's thesis to see how we might do our own. And it starts like a building with an abstract, an introduction that lays out the context and says where the work fits, a literature review that effortlessly goes through all the major theorists and the major critics and the major work and situates your own work in a dialogue, methodology, how and why you're doing it like this and why not like that, and then variously the data, whatever you've gathered from experiments or fieldwork or reading or a mixture of these, and how you've turned that into themes and how you discuss it and how you know you found something important from it. And it ends with a conclusion that says, this is what's found, and that's what it's contributed to knowledge. That's why it's important. And you all have to have all of these elements. They're a bit differently shaped in different disciplines. So it's a well-built building, and Jill was talking about making this a bedtime story. It has to be readable, it has to be coherent, and it's pretty much always in this shape, with a little bit of deviation maybe. There's also themes, like these stringy lines, themes that run all the way through, and theories that underpin everything you do. So how do you get? Let's give you 2 minutes so we can spend the end of the morning thinking about the case studies. 2 minutes, how do you get from the research journey to the well-built building? What will help you get there? Talk to each other. 2 or 3 minutes. How can you get from the research journey to the well-built thesis? What will help you get there? Just a few ideas. Noise. Thank you. Okay, that's just focused you. You haven't solved the problems. How do you get from the research journey to the perfect thesis? Quick answers? Yep. Shh. Go on.
I think it's just like you're trekking on a mountain and you are unscattered, you're just going up with a motivation to reach at the top, and then you can see, look down, and then you can make up this the perfect thesis.
So you can see how it develops. So motivation is very important. Keep the shape in mind right from the beginning and see how you're developing. That's a good one. One of our colleagues, Vernon Trafford, and another one, Shosh Lishem, have written a book which looks at, it's called Stepping Stones, and it looks at starting at the end of the thesis. So you think what examiners want, you think what the shape should be, right from the beginning. So you're not going, I wonder what a thesis is. You know, you're going, I'm working towards this.
So, as you said, you're looking from the top.
Yeah, looking from the top, and keep motivated. And you had one.
I do believe that writing a thesis is just like a skyscraper. That the foundation is very, very important. If the foundation is very solid and whatever the people who are involved in making buildings are aware of it, just put in the foundation. That is the agreement between the student and the supervisor, good supervision on time and on the spot, feedback, motivation, and trying to put the student, if it is not autonomous, if it already has done some research, wonderful. But what if she or he has not done any research? So somehow should be motivated. Yeah, building. Just putting put on the right path in order to reach the goal. And just by introducing, I don't say write to her or him, just maybe introducing some resources, some other people, motivating her or him to go through network discussions and try to raise the question and see how the people just give.
Okay, I'll stop you because you're actually describing everything we've been doing today, and I'm going to do for the 2 days. Absolutely. Well, it's about the student-supervisor interaction and the wider community and the reading, and it's about getting a good foundation with a good research proposal that's accepted, a good research plan, And then these interactions between you. So getting off on a good journey and keeping going, keeping your mind on the final output, and then the interactions between the student and the supervisor to help get the student there, knowing that there will be some things that go wrong. And there will also be, what we haven't really looked at enough, some of these amazing learning leaps when the work is very clever and very well expressed. You capture that. And then it has to be written through over and over and over until it's ready to go out, because it's as good as it's going to get. And we hope that you're going to get there. But now, what we want you to do, to just a few minutes, about 7, is to have a go at those case studies. So you've got case studies. It's the one with the ones with the gaps. Can you hold it up? Looks like that, because you've got some others. These case studies are real students with real problems. I'd like you to turn to your neighbour in 2s and 3s, and we're going to give you about 7 minutes, so we hear a couple of things. What can you do with these students? Have a quick look and land on one of them and see if you can solve it. There's things to do with broken supervision relationships, with misunderstandings about learning, all sorts of things. So has anybody not got one? If you haven't, can you share with the person next to you? They look like that. There's about 6 of them, 5 of them. Solve them. But you need to talk to do it. And we'll stop you in now about 5 or 6 minutes. Go. Turn to each other, get in 2s and 3s, turn round. Please solve these. Lots of noise. Okay, this can take all day, but in fact all you've had is a couple of minutes. So I'm just going to ask you for some quick thoughts. Anybody do number 1, the mutual interest, but they're missing and avoiding and they're not doing what you ask them to do? Solutions for number 1. Yeah.
Can you turn on your...
Yeah, and be quick.
We discussed with our groups about, for example, as a supervisor, we can provide or as a rule that every we have weekly meeting or every 2 weeks meetings for all students, and then if some students don't attend, and then they are questionable about their academic behavior, and then even indirectly we can evaluate students about different aspects like language, about skills and something. And if we realize that there is some lackage, and we can individually work with help to him or her.
Okay, we got two answers there, and this one also solves number 4, which is quite similar. But it might be more complicated than that, but briefly what you said is get some good systems in place so that you are meeting regularly and that it's normal. So actually they're not going to avoid you, they're not going to escape you, you're going to all meet on Thursday. And also then you can start to tackle some of these learning issues, because they might be avoiding you because they got a bit stuck, or they might be avoiding you because they're lazy. You don't know unless you meet regularly, and then you can actually help them with their learning. Thank you, but it might be very complicated.
One question.
Yes.
What happens if it persists? The
Yeah.
student doesn't come. What would we do?
Yeah, because this is the simple answer. If it persists, you need to start to put in systematic structures to break it. And this is something that is working with 2 of my students. I'm not very systematic with them normally because I let them go their own way. But we are meeting regularly. They are reporting to several things. We are looking at everything that they do and commenting on the progress with them. We've got them in tight focus because they were not learning from what was happening, and they were not developing. And so very, very structured, very supportive, very systematic, step by step. Do this piece of work, we'll look at it, we'll make a comment, do that piece of work, meet then, discuss this, and we'll ease up. This is me and the other supervisor. We'll ease up when they start to be more focused and they've clearly got over the problem. So I think it's structure your way out of it, but if you start with a structure, it does help.
Still persists.
Well,
the meeting time, okay, 2 weeks, come, half a done but 1 page.
Yeah.
That kind of thing, it persists.
Just to say, in the experience I've had, that the constant structure and the constant expectation and the constant response usually turns 98% of the students around. You've got 2% who shouldn't be here anyway, and I'm sorry, they ought to go and do something else and let someone else in. That's a little ungenerous, but it might be that they just can't do it. And what was your point? Sorry, yeah. Jill?
So if it does persist, it's often an indication that it's a weak stint possibly.
Very, very weak.
Where the institutional part kicks in, because there will be some point where they have to go through a process, and if they're not prepared for that, then the institution often curtails the.
And some of us are back home are supporting students through to the very last drop, because I still think they can do it, But there was one of mine who was reported, I was doing the support to the last drop, and the agent, because this is an international program, said she was wandering on the beach. She wasn't doing any work. I was, she wasn't. And in the end, she just decided not to bother. So sometimes that happens. What were you going to say there?
Even as you mentioned, some students are lazy or are not motivated. Still, there is a reason. I guess the supervisors and team and co-supervisors, they at least they can find a reason.
Yeah.
Why does a student who wants to study PhD in a high level of education still doesn't have motivation? There is something wrong in him. And if the student is not ready, they can or lazy, they can help the student and support the student to find the reason.
Let them rediscover their motivation. But sadly, the 2%, there's just the 2% for whom it wasn't the right choice in the first place. And they probably would have been happier doing something else, moving on in a career, maybe writing a book if they're a really academic type person. But the PhD wasn't the right vehicle. And helping somebody find that it wasn't the right thing is also a good step forward.
They remind the students, you are not ready for PhD, or it's not
Yeah, that's helpful. Absolutely. So it's not just... Okay, we're running right out of time. I'm going to take 1 more minute. Anybody do number 2? No? Anyone do number 3? Yeah, what did you do with number 3?
If I can make a very helpful peer support group, suppose if I leave for 6 months, but no problem, but my helpful peer support group, my co-researcher, even my co-supervisor, or my colleagues, or the other senior students, can help them, can guide the new students. So it will be helpful for the new students, how he or she will prosper, how he will progress. But for the final the students who is going to submit his or her thesis, in this case, now the time of internet communication is very good. So easily the students, what he is suffering, he can share, because he has not only the supervisor, also he has the co-supervisor. At first he can discuss with the co-supervisors, and also after the discussion he can send it to his supervisor through emails, through Facebook, through chat.
Absolutely. And you can also talk on Skype. So first of all, we've got a supervisory group in place, we've got a community in place, they should be supported in that. And then you are actually able to supervise because you send things through the internet and you can have Skype meetings. It's a bit like, it's not as good as, but it's a bit like a face-to-face meeting. I'm going to stop because you need to stop for a bit. I think we might look at number 5 if you're here this afternoon, because it's about international students. Thank you so much for being so lively and engaged and full on with these issues. It's important, we've got to get it right, and it's also very, very good learning and teaching experience doing supervision and being supervised. So I hope you've enjoyed thinking about it, because we have. Thank you.